Okay, now we're recording. Cool. So welcome. This is the second kubeadm adoption working group meeting, and we have some things on the agenda. We have a working document with blockers and a wish list for kubeadm adoption. And yeah, let's get started. Justin had something he said a minute ago.
Yeah, I'll repeat it, which is we put up a doc, I wrote up a doc trying to summarize the blockers, everyone's blockers and wish list items. It is knowingly incomplete in at least two ways. If your blocker or wish list item is not even represented, please go and add it. And also I've tried to put underneath each one, a list of the tools and whether for them it is a blocker or a wish list. So please, I did that for COPS, I hope accurately, and for KubeCorn and the CNCF project, I'm sure less accurately. I did not do it for anyone else. So please go through and add your plus ones, your votes. So, we can get an idea of which ones are actually most important to people and whether they are actually just on the COPS. If it's just a COPS wish list item, it's probably not a priority, right? But if it's a blocker for 3 people, that's much more of a priority. So that's how I'm thinking we'll triage based on your votes. So your votes matter.
Can we, real quick, I'm sorry, my linear brain is taking over. Can we define blocks and wish list, please?
A blocker is something which it really is a barrier to your adopting kubeadm. It doesn't, it doesn't have to be like, I absolutely will not, but it is certainly like it is a major stumbling block for us to adopt kubeadm without it. It will require tons of work. A wish list is, I think it would be good, but we can adopt kubeadm without it, although we think it would be a good thing to be in kubeadm, whether it's simply because it would make us more comfortable or whether we think it's because it would be additional functionality that kubeadm should do rather than, COPS doing it and KubeCorn doing it and GK doing it.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Should we go through these one at a time?
That is probably a great way to do it, and should I read them, or I can just go through, why don't I read through them quickly, and if anyone has any comments, just speak up.
Feel free to add things as we go, if that wasn't said already. I don't know.
Please do add things. Yeah, if you can just copy and paste a paragraph and edit it and put it at the bottom, I guess, and we'll slot it back into place based on the votes. And if you do it at the bottom, then I will not miss it as I read through them now. The resiliency or non-happy path in kubeadm. So obviously when everything works, but the cases when it doesn't work, like what is the behavior? In particular around like system D kubelet hanging, and how does kubeadm recover from that being called out? The HA support is obviously important for anyone that wants to do HA. So if kubeadm can't work with HA, then that is probably a blocker for anyone that needs to do HA. I feel like this has changed, but anyway, a Golang interface. In other words, a means of integrating with the existing kubeadm project or code. There is a CLI interface. There's a discussion of a phases interface. Some installers would probably find it easier to use a Golang interface to the code. It came up that kubeadm basically bundles a set of versions together, a set of components into a set of versions, and that for some people is actually problematic, particularly if you want to test different skewed versions of the project. That's obviously has some challenges because we don't test particularly odd combinations, but that is an issue. Support for cloud providers running out of tree. So in general, we're trying to pull the cloud providers out of Kube Controller Manager. The Kubernetes project is trying to pull the cloud providers out of Kube Controller Manager and into a new controller manager similar to Kube Controller Manager called Cloud Controller Manager that will be more replaceable, I think is the core idea there. And so support for that. The init join mechanism is tricky, or I believe it to be tricky for kops in HA scenarios, in particular where a cloud, we bring up, in kops, the particular problem is like we bring up like 3 masters, and to run init on exactly one of those is hard to figure out how to do. So that's
the same as the HA one you listed above.
Not really. So HA support is like, do we have HA support at all? And then init join is the notion of like the model for initializing it. So we could have HA support that still requires you to do leader election. So kops could perfectly well do leader election itself. Figure out how to do init on exactly one of those, and so we could have HA support while keeping one queue.
Sorry, just a quick question. If kops is looking to like use the GoLink interface to replace phases, and is even looking for init join replacements, what part of kubeadm is kops planning to use?
We are going to use kubeadm. kubeadm has is the place where we configure all the resources, like RBAC and key initialization and configuration of the API server, and the hope is that we can continue to leverage the work that is done by people that change things in Kubernetes and also change things at the same time in kubeadm.
So if I understand it correctly, you're going to just exec kubeadm init and kubeadm join in your, instead of node up what you have now, you're going to exec kubeadm init and join. And now if you say that I want to have 5 masters or 3 masters, if we run kubeadm init on every one of them, it's not going to work, because, well, then we have kind of 3 different clusters, so that they have to somehow coordinate that, well, master B spins up first and has to say, does the third generation, all these things, spins up the first API server, uploads maybe something, I don't know, set up RBAC rules, and then master A and C comes up some minutes later, and then they have to realize that, well, we have a leader, and then do kubeadm join --master or something to hook up with the master B. So I think that's the thing, but I think also we can do this pretty easily by requiring external etcd clusters with this. But
yeah. So I think one of the ways that I think a better way to describe what we want is we want to use all the kubeadm code. It's just that the way in which it is called currently through phases or init join is slightly problematic for our scenarios in kops. That makes sense?
I guess, as kubeadm defines what, these interfaces, it begs the question, what is kubeadm and what is kubeadm providing? And it seems like it'd be good to distill that if it's sort of expertise around what the correct API server flags are to run or what the correct controller manager are to run. That's really different than, opinionated command line tool that has all these things. So I guess it brings up an interesting point of, if you make all of these components pluggable, what are we actually agreeing on?
I don't know that it's pluggable. Is it pluggable or more just, I guess, consumable through code rather than through the execing is one of the asks. And the other ask is the ability to run init on all 3 nodes of a master, right? I don't think those change the idea that kubeadm is opinionated. I do think, though, in general, that we would like, the goal of SIG Cluster Lifecycle has always been to get to make Kubernetes easier to install, to pull things into the core, and kubeadm is maybe a stopping ground for things that are going to end up in the core, like component config. All the work that we're doing for component configuration will hopefully get out of kops, go out of kubeadm, and go into component config in the core. And I think that's been the plan for longer than SIG Cluster Lifecycle has been around, right?
Yeah.
So I would hope that, yes, kubeadm will get smaller, kops will get smaller, all the tools will get smaller, but I think that's probably a good thing, right? Because then we know that we can pull these things into core safely. But
Okay.
someone, yeah, I guess from bare VM to running API boot prompt is, I think, where kubeadm, what we want kubeadm to do. So downloads the components, ensures they are running, and downloads Docker and ensures Docker is running, or Rocket, or whatever, whatever the future holds.
It downloads Docker? Sorry, I'm.
Well, someone has to ensure that Docker is running, but.
No,
Well,
it does a pre-flight check to make sure Docker is there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically it. But yeah, the kubeadm package, no, it is actually not depending. But yeah, it's just a pre-flight check. But anyway, the main value of kubeadm is like kubeadm knows what the best practices are for every version, and provides a consistent interface to interact with. Like, I mean, you run kubeadm on 1.6 and you're gonna get some functionality that is as good as we could do at that time. You run kubeadm init on 1.7 and you're gonna get the node authorizer and some additional features enabled as well, which is like an improvement from 1.6. And you don't have to like do these RBAC rules, for example. It's set up for you with the best, on a best effort, right? And then we also abstract away, like, you don't have to know which certs to generate, like which certs are required for which versions, and all these things. So I think that's one of the huge values of adopting kubeadm. I wrote a blog about it like in January or something. It's probably a little bit stale at this point, but might be worth referencing to still.
I mean, I think it's certainly a valid point. Let's finish the list. How about that? And then we'll come back to it with more opportunities for questions. How about that? So the next on the list was the security, or a secure alternative to Bootstrap tokens if Bootstrap tokens are indeed insecure or cannot be made secure. Lucas said there might be some magic flag. That was sort of a problem for kops, where most of these API servers are on the internet.
What's the concern with Bootstrap tokens?
It requires anonymous access to the API, and which is a little bit scary, because then you're one mistake away from ownage instead of two mistakes.
So bootstrapping tokens don't require it. It's the public config map, right?
Yeah. So Bootstrap tokens have two
uses.
Yeah, two uses, and it can be used for validation and it can be used for authentication. And it's the validation part you're concerned of, where we have the cluster info config map public. And yeah, I mean, we don't have rate limiting on the API server, for example. So yeah, I understand that, and it will be hopefully already in 1.8, maybe in 1.9.
I mean, also like I think any form of non-authenticated access to an API server that is on the public internet is a no-go.
Yeah, but it's just two kubectl commands away. I mean, I don't think.
What's just two kubectl?
Disabling that access. I mean,
well, but not if we want a new. If in other words, in order for a node to join, we have to leave that on, then that is a problem for kops.
You don't. You can just copy files around if you can.
Let's not get started. Let's continue traversing, right?
But I do think this is kind of done already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Certificate rotation was the next on the list. I think that's just a nice to have for everyone, where effectively these certificates that are the keys to the kingdom have a limited duration of life for security reasons. Splitting kubeadm into its own repo will help people that want to consume kubeadm via code. E2E testing on clouds. This was a wish list item, but basically greater test coverage to ensure that we don't break something in kubeadm, particularly when it comes to cloud support.
Can I speak on that really quick? I'm happy to do the testing outside of the kubeadm official repos. If I could just be given an avenue to like report back data on specific releases, if that makes it any easier. I know I'm solutioning already, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, it should work with federated testing. So you do all kinds of testing and just report it to the test grid, and we can have it in the SIG Cluster Lifecycle tab, so it's easily discoverable. So that makes sense, but it never touches like test info.
Cool.
Yeah, you have two options. You can either do that, or you can set up something in test infra to run tests on AWS. That works also.
Okay, I might ping you guys offline.
Next up is a cluster API, which actually I think we've discussed a little bit in SIG Cluster Lifecycle, but the idea of an API, well, there's the kubeadm portion and there's the non-kubeadm portion, but we'd certainly discussed the idea of an API that controls your infrastructure or defines your infrastructure and could be used to control it. And I guess there's also the notion that, do we also want an API for kubeadm itself? I guess is a question.
I wrote this in the doc, but kubeadm is currently not concerned with provisioning, and I like that layering of not having it. Something else should provision the machines, and kubeadm should just run on top. So I'm a little confused about how this, like, what scope this is adding to kubeadm.
I think this is more. Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, I don't think it's really adding anything to kubeadm. I think all that we're saying is, with the primitive set forth in kubeadm solving the problem of deploying infrastructure on the second layer, putting that idea instead of a larger idea that solves infrastructure on the underlying layer and allowing to pass data back and forth between those two bits of the object is going to be meaningful from an operator's perspective.
Sure, it just seems like a separate project.
Well, I mean, I think regardless of where it ends up, it's still having an API for kubeadm is something that we need to discuss. Where that ends up in the long term and who uses it, I think, is another discussion.
Yeah, sorry, I guess I'm just confused about what this adds, like where the integration point with kubeadm is.
I think this is more like documenting the like integration points between these two projects with the cluster API spec or whatever we call it, and kubeadm. It's not gonna add anything really, like on a code basis. It's not gonna add anything to kubeadm. It's more like we recognize that, well, it's like the layer one, like Kubicorn or whatever that implements the cluster API might just use kubeadm, and we should just make sure that it plays well together or something like that.
So like same with docs for like how to set up a cluster using Terraform and then running kubeadm on top of it.
Yeah,
cool.
Exactly.
I think cluster API might be a bit of a confusing name for this. Maybe just kubeadm API would be more appropriate.
We could definitely rephrase, yeah.
Thank you for that. And yeah, so then that's yeah. And then the next one was the ability to easily run federation on top of kubeadm clusters. Again, I think this is, we're not going to like subsume kubefed, but whatever integration we can do to make that easy, I guess, or whether it's docs or whatever that is, I think that's a wish list item we see here from Canonical, at least. I know of others as well.
What doesn't work about that today? Is there something about the way we configure clusters with kubeadmin that prevents people from then running federation on top of it? Federation is supposed to be purely additive on top of existing clusters.
I think there's certainly something where the sort of the topic we just changed, where we had the clusters API, right? So Federation has its own notion of clusters, another notion of clusters. And so I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what the, if someone has more details.
Lucas, you know?
So I haven't checked. I'm not 100% sure, but I talked briefly to Madhu, and he thought it would be pretty easy. That it would be just an addition on top, like run kubeadm init in 3 different zones on Google Cloud, and then add some nodes to them, and then just run kubefed with Google Cloud DNS integration and point to these 3 kubeadm inited clusters. That's what we think is the case, at least. But I mean, it totally makes sense to have this like item here and just recognize that this is something we really should document. And when talking to Madhu, this is also something we should like actually test and have. I mean, we should set up GC tests for this, and as part of moving from like kube up.
Yeah, I guess because there's an email thread about the fact that the Federation tests reuse some of the kube up code. I don't want that to be conflated with this, right? So the fact that they're reusing some of the code doesn't really matter. Is there something in the way we configure kubeadmin clusters that prevents them from federating them? And if so, we should fix that. And if not, then the federation should be purely layered on top.
Yeah, I hope that it just works, but yeah, let's find out. I think Madhu is gonna come to some of our Friday meetings or Wednesday, whenever we have them.
Okay.
And yeah, we can sync with him.
So I guess that leads us to, I guess, our next point, which is more documentation in general. And I guess this would be one where it'd be great. Like someone could try writing up the docs for like, I try running kubeadm on 3 clusters, I run kubefed and it all works gloriously, or boom, something fails horribly, right? But in general, like just more documentation is it was mentioned, no one actually put it as a wish list or a blocker, but it was just a general, like the malaise of open source, everyone wants more documentation.
Yeah, let's put a matching wall, an asterisk.
Exactly. No one's going to say they want less documentation, right? Upgrade path if possible. So
definitely possible. Coming for 1.8. Just run kubeadm upgrade.
I'm happy to hear. So the problem here is that, yeah, it's not supported upstream, right, for upgrades and everything. But because Kubernetes runs so fast, clients get frustrated with running stale software and all these things. So you have to somehow work on actually upgrading their infrastructure while keeping all the pods and containers like online. So this is one thing that it's a pain point for us. And yeah, happy to hear that it will be addressed at some point. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess to be clear there, the upgrades we're working on in 1.8 are upgrading the control plane, not updating all of the nodes in an automated fashion. I think that is something that's probably more in line with the cluster API work, where you have something that mutates your infrastructure to upgrade them.
Yeah, and yeah, as you said, like the upgrade process is not like upgrade a single service. It's like I have something critical running on the pods, and I want them to be online because users are using it, are hitting it, and like my clients are hitting it, and all these things. And somehow I want all the underneath layers to be upgraded. Kubernetes, in principle, does handle this case because, like, you know, if you kill a worker, the pods will get migrated, and you have replication sets and all these things. So if you have set up your infrastructure correctly, you should be able to handle these upgrades. But on the because the kubeadmin basically somehow hides the complexity of setting up the infrastructure, it has to document, it has to at least document what am I going to do if I want to go from 1.7 to 1.8. At least
we do have that documented, and I know that Jacob wrote documents for how to do that, but the orchestration of doing it across all your nodes is outside the scope of kubeadm. And Lucas has his hand up too.
Yeah, so I think we have exactly what what you seem to want, and it's basically this kubeadm upgrade command. You run kubeadm init on 1.7 to your customer, and then when 1.8 comes out, you just do kubeadm upgrade, and it will upgrade the control plane for you. And not any of your workloads will be disturbed, because everything just works, although the control plane is gone for a second or two. But then, as Robert said, you have to still upgrade your workers, and that really depends on if you're on some cloud or on your bare metal or whatever. And it's pretty straightforward, though. It's just like remove a node, drain, evict all pods, and do apt-get upgrade or whatever, and then get it back online. And, well, there we go. But it's kind of painful, because if you have 1,000 nodes, you have to somehow orchestrate this in a good way. But this is definitely out of scope for kubeadm.
understood. Yes, definitely. Thank you.
And the fact that it's out of scope is exactly why I think the cluster API effort is important, is because this is a problem that we sort of want to be able to solve once and let everyone reuse. Like, we've done a lot of work on solving exactly that problem on GKE, but it's like proprietary code that can't be reused, which is really a shame. Like, it would be much better if we had, like, here's a library that you can use to do upgrades, and we have a way to abstract clouds out from that a little bit or entirely, and everybody can sort of use the same flow. Just to put a plug in for the other sub-working group.
Cool. What's the next item, Justin?
I would say there's nothing stopping you contributing that code to open source, but that
Well,
might not.
The thing that's stopping us is the entanglements with the parts of the code we cannot open source. So, I mean,
Yes.
the principles can be open source. Some of the code maybe could be directly open source, but I mean,
Right. The final. So the final thing on the list is ability to use or skip sub-steps in the process, i.e., or a way to do that would be phases being fully implemented. This is a new one. So, Robert, do you want to call this out in a little bit more detail?
so Chris added that, so I'll let Chris talk to it.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't here last week. It's just there are just a couple missing holes in the phases from like, say, writing the static pod manifest. But the reason we want to do this is we don't like the idea of, say, the master being able to sign cert, so we want to be able to do the cert distribution ourselves. Maybe we could move later on to delegating that to a cert approver, cert signer through the API server. But right now we don't have that, so we'd want to be able to take that. That's not as big of a deal because there's code in place for it to check to see if it's already there, and if not, skip over it. Other things like mark the master will just fail because we don't register our master node with the cluster at all. And we'd like to be able to basically do the entire process but skip that. And we also do something special with add-ons, and we'd like to handle that ourselves or move to an add-on manager project that's, I think, still in the incubation phase. Basically more fine-grained control over the steps.
So yeah, I can talk to that. Regarding certificates, we have a pretty good solution, I think. Since 1.6, kubeadm will not generate certificates if it already finds valid ones on disk, and it will not require the CA key either. So you can generate everything like from your special CA somewhere stored somewhere else, and then run your custom cert approver and signer. Most often maybe just the signer, because it requires the CA key. It should be run somewhere else. So I think that use case, well, that's absolutely something that should be documented even better. I think we have some comments in the docs maybe, but not like this full guide or blog post where we can say that this is exactly how you should do. You should run these OpenSSL commands with your really private CA key, then CCP over these files into these directories, run kubeadm init, and it will just work. Then you kubectl apply or just refer to your controller somewhere else that has access to the CA key and start joining nodes. So yeah, definitely. And the Phases CLI is thought to be this really fine-grained invocation of a phase, a subtask. So if you want to run, if you just want to do certificates, generate certificates, you run kubeadm phase certificates all, or you run certificates just API server signing cert, serving cert or something. Or if you just want to generate a kubeconfig file, or if you just want to do manifests or whatever, it will be possible via this. But it will. I don't think it's worthwhile to add the kubeadm init to skip over things, as that will get extremely complex.
I'm not asking for kubeadm init to skip. I went through the code to see what was there and what was not, and the Phases API or command line API would work fine for us. It's just not fully implemented from what I could tell. And so the blocker is for that to be finished. I did not see a phase subcommand to write the static pod manifest, which is currently our biggest pain point on GKE. And we want to get rid of the templates that we have and actually just use kubeadm to generate them.
Yeah.
Was he talking about the ones on the nodes or on the master?
Both.
So yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is kind of staged in my local Kubernetes Git repo. I'm gonna make the required PRs, and I also have Fabrizio working on something. He doesn't seem to be here. I'm hopeful that that all phases are going to be exposed via the CLI in 1.8. So
well, in this coming quarter, I'll be very interested in reviewing and/or contributing to help that effort.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll tag you on reviews.
Awesome.
So I'll just note that we basically discussed making all of the phases skippable, also maybe not having a public config map. I think this is a good opportunity to sort of talk about, to what extent does kubeadm become so pluggable that it meets everyone's needs, but also isn't really doing everything, right? We've discussed a lot about where we need all of these to be pluggable, and I think it'd be very helpful if we had some agreed upon common ground about what are the actual core components of kubeadm that everyone agrees that we are all going to be using. Because it seems like there's literally everything in kubeadm somebody is asking to skip right now. Yeah,
so hopefully, I wrote up the phases doc for 1.7. I think I linked to it. There might be, basically, the end goal is have one phase do pretty much one thing, atomically, and hopefully also a documented route that this is what kubeadm actually does and expects, to the next phase. I don't think kubeadm should be broken down into smaller parts than the phases. We can discuss this, but for example, generating some certificate seems to be the lowest lowest level thing we can do atomically. I don't know if that answers your question. So we have two routes: everything or something or nothing.
I guess to give an example, so Bootcube a while back made this choice that we weren't going to do any templating or rendering. We have a render phase, but people don't use it. Tectonic does not use the render phase to generate manifest. It provides its own. So Bootcube a long time ago decided it's not going to be opinionated about any of that or how you bring up basically most of the worker configuration of the master, it's just going to do self-hosted. So if you use bootkube, you are getting self-hosted, and it's your job to bring everything else. At the point where kubeadm is being so pluggable that it's allowing you to skip phases and do all that kind of stuff, I think it's important to highlight what are the phases that kubeadm is not going to let anyone skip. What is the essence of the kubeadm that you can't skip ever, because that's intrinsic to the value proposition of the tool.
So I don't think with kubeadm in it, you're not going to be able to skip anything at any time. That's just going to do the full thing, full meal for you. But with the phases, it basically becomes your responsibility, I guess. I mean, if we have 6 or 7 different phases and you choose to not, then you have to write have 7 CLI commands invoking the phase. And if you skip the 5th one, you have to do something.
Sure.
Yeah, have something.
But if I skip 5 of the phases and use 1, have I adopted kubeadm?
So kops has something here which annoys people.
I think so.
That try to use kops, but I think is actually helpful. So with kops, we have this notion that you can put phases into validate mode, or put tasks into validate mode. So we verify the outputs, but we don't do it for you. And we have active discussion about what happens if the validation fails. But the idea being kubeadm defines the requirements for what is installed, right? So you have to have a manifest, you have to have some keys, you have to do some RBAC stuff, right? All of those are done automatically when you do kubeadm in it. If you are an advanced installer that has special requirements, then you can opt out of some of those phases, but you still have to satisfy the requirements of those phases, in my opinion. At least that's the kops approach. Kops actually actively checks that you've validated, that you've fulfilled the contract, but it may be that kubeadm decides not to. It may be that some of those contracts are too flexible. The way the philosophy in kops is if GKE says we're not going to use RSA crypto, we're going to use some magic Google thing, right? Then we would actually add support for magic Google crypto as well as RSA crypto. We wouldn't say we're just going to skip over the flags and not validate them. So the approach that kops takes is the requirements of the requirements. We don't have to actually fulfill them for you. You can go and create your own AWS objects and we will validate them for you. But this kubeadm defines what a kubeadm cluster is.
So I think a validate thing would be cool, but I do realize that we're gonna get more PRs fixing validation to satisfy someone's really crazy thing, instead of actually just having them written down in the markdown doc.
So the notion in kops is the validate doesn't validate. The validate validates that the model, that reality matches the model. And if you want to do something crazy like Google crazy crypto, Google secret crypto, right? You have to implement Google secret crypto in the model and plummet all the way through into the spec. And then the validation says, is the configuration in reality equal to the configuration in the model? So there's no oh, you can cheat. It's you have to add support for it if you want to support it.
Yeah, but I do think that's out of scope. But yeah, I mean, the phases doc states what it expects, what inputs and outputs. But I mean, and you can fulfill them as you want. And if you don't, you're going to end up with a broken cluster, right?
Right. So kubeadm defines the requirements. It's up to you, and it will do it for you if you let it. You can skip a phase, but it's still on you. If you skip a phase, it's on you to do the requirements.
So does that mean, back to Eric's point, to be considered a kubeadmin cluster, there needs to be a final phase that is verify that you completed the second to last phase? or that we require people to run the last phase, because that sort of verifies all the inputs up to the end. And then we can say, assuming you pass that last phase, we know that you're at a specific baseline. Because I think part of what he's getting at is, if everybody says we use kubeadm, but everybody skips all the phases but one and is like technically using kubeadm, but we end up with every cluster looks vastly different from every other cluster, then we haven't really accomplished the goal, right? The goal is to get clusters to sort of a standard baseline where you can build software on top of them that assumes that baseline that is compatible across installations.
I mean, this is where I say, like, whether or not we actually implement it, we should have the notion of validate. So it should pass validation on every stage. Implementing it is a different matter, but also it's not it's not linear, but there's no last phase, at least in COPS, but yeah.
So isn't that kind of a conformance test, or do you mean we should have something even? I mean, that's what we're doing now in the kubeadm job. We do kubeadm init and join 5 nodes or something, and then run the conformance test and also now the bootstrap token test, and the node authorizer tests are coming soon. So I mean, we'll just like we're stating that these test suits should pass. And
to me, conformance is a behavioral test. So in
yeah,
theory,
exactly.
you could have a test of, you could re-implement Kubernetes in Java, right? You could pass the conformance tests, and there's a whole different debate, which I don't want to get into, as to whether or not that is Kubernetes. But I'm saying that, like, the kubeadm test will be like, you need keys, and you have a manifest which looks like this, and it uses keys, and it uses the node authorizer, and ideally we'd say, you know, like a strict string match, right? But maybe someone will come up with a valid reason why that's not acceptable. But that's what I think. Like, the actual on disk output should be identical for it to be a kubeadm cluster.
I do think that the machine validation thing is useful and interesting, but also I'd prefer to focus on the other things first.
You don't have to implement it. I think it's a philosophy rather than
more like document it first, and then see if somebody goes and builds Looks/kubeadm validator thing.
I think it is an issue though that kubeadm needs to think about, because like we turn off all of the verification whenever we use kubeadm. We have to, because we run in a container, right? So if I can't even trust kubeadm's current, pre-flight checks because they make assumptions that aren't valid for my environment, then I'm concerned about what validation would look like further down the line. Because right now, my only evidence is that it doesn't help me, right?
I mean, I'd say there that's like the equivalent of Google Secret Crypto, right? I don't even know if Google Secret Crypto exists, but whatever. Like you have like secret Core OS container kubelet, right? And so you need to plumb support in kubeadm to say, well, one of the valid kubeadm options is to run kubelet in a container, and that should then pass all validation because it is supported. It is a supported kubeadm configuration, and then a supported kubeadm configuration gets E2E tested, and everything will come together.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, the pre-flight checks are another story. I mean, right now they're, as you said, adopted, or they're mostly this happy path where we have you download from apt-get kubeadm or yum install, and then we have some assumptions like you're running systemd, for example, and checking is Docker running and these things, and just to make it easy, because initially in 1.4 we had a lot of problems with users not having this valid configuration, and then kubeadm just hang with, which is this resiliency thing that was the first item. And therefore we made the pre-flight checks, and they're pretty much bundled, unfortunately.
I guess my concern isn't that the pre-flight checks don't pass for our container Linux. That's fine for me. It's more like at the point where kubeadm is going to define some validation or conformance, I think that's a pressing issue because those assumptions so far have like broken my use of it, right? So if now my path to adopt kubeadm is like I have to pass all the pre-flight checks, then that is, it's interesting.
Well, it sounds like you definitely have a blocker in that you want support for effectively container Linux, right? Like kubelet running in a container is a blocker for you.
Yeah, and we sent a couple of PRs, and I think we're pretty close. So I don't want to put that as a blocker because I think that we have a good understanding of what it takes right now.
Yeah, and this is really much more of a like UX thing than a technical thing. It's more like warning the user if he hasn't enabled. I mean, systemctl stop Docker and then tries to run kubeadm in it, and that's why we had such cases, and that's why we added like such a verification. I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's a fine line between having coding into kubeadm all possible configurations with like run, what is it called? Like, well, every other systemd clone or init system, but we can add, I mean, some really useful, like running in a container, absolutely. But it's really hard. I mean, also, if you're using CRI, oh, this breaks. We have an issue for that.
I saw a comment in the chat about Kubernetes core, and we should also like make sure everyone has the opportunity to speak. I don't know if anyone else has. It was Giovanni. Do you want to vocalize what you wrote about Kubernetes core or the kubeadm?
Yeah, can you hear me? Cool. So yeah, this is a topic that I think has surfaced many times. I think I followed this a year or so ago, and there was this discussion of this uncertainty. What exactly is Kubernetes core, and what would be a now here I'm confused if they are talking about what's a supported deployment or more a high level architecture thing. So I linked to this this post, and there is a document there which is the architecture roadmap. And I was curious to know if kubeadm would be the tool that enforces what's Kubernetes. Oh, well, if kubeadm would be only concerned what may become defined as Kubernetes core, or I don't even know if it's related, so I'm just asking.
So I'm not entirely sure, but I guess we don't know what Kubernetes core really is yet. I mean, SIG architecture is up for defining something more strictly defined, like in a doc. I mean, Brian Grant has written some a couple of these documents earlier, and I think it's one of the missions for SIG architecture to actually like check these into Kubernetes repo or whatever and finalize them, get consensus across the ecosystem. And well, then we also have CNCF conformance and all these other tests that validate that you're something that can have the Kubernetes trademark on it. But TLDR, I guess we don't know really exactly.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think something that's like Kubernetes core is supposed to be like the absolute core functionality that you really cannot be Kubernetes, as I understand it. You really can't be Kubernetes without it. And there's also like conformance, which is like a slightly broader, like this is real Kubernetes. But I think where it gets, I think if kubeadm was installing a lot of things that were not in core or requiring a lot of things that were not in core, then we have a flag of like, why are these two deviating? and there may be a valid reason for it, but I think we should certainly examine why they would deviate. But other than that, I don't know that the core definition necessarily is a debate we have to synchronize on, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah, so
Cool. Thank you.
I think it's more what Eric said, like, can we somehow find a machine, like something coded in Go or whatever that validates your cluster meets some requirements at least, like not on the Kubernetes apps level, that's more conformance tests, like killing a pod and look that it comes up again. That's more like testing the controller manager, but we probably need something that tests more the deployment. And also this turns into soon like cluster API that where if we specify something in that cluster API and want to upgrade nodes, then they will get following upgrade or whatever. I mean, it's definitely a hard problem, but we should definitely. I mean, this group should start with like documenting these things. What do we expect of a conformant like cluster on a deployment level, like on a setup level?
We do have like 5 minutes left, it looks like. I don't know if anyone else wants to, it's not yet had the opportunity to say anything they've been burning to say.
Keep up the good work, everyone.
I guess we should try to figure out what our next steps are, right? Like, how do we want to proceed from here? It'd be good to get, there's certainly some issues, like from the core OS, right, Eric? Like, as you say, like around what we want to see. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think, I think this isn't necessarily an issue from our side per se, but it's like, if we are going to make everything in kubeadm pluggable, then I think it's helpful to define, things like COPS where you do validation or that kind of thing. This is more a general concern than me representing my, core OS or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, when I brought this up, I wasn't talking about skipping a lot of the processor not being kubeadm compliant. I was talking about just wanting to handle cert distribution ourselves, but still using the same kind of cert technology, not super secret Google cert, as Justin puts it. And also, we do handle like versioning of our add-ons a little differently because we want more control over that, and we'd want to be able to do that ourselves, but still pretty much the same types of add-ons. So it would still pass validation.
And arguably, like, we could, if we make add-on separately, the add-on manager is a separate issue, but if we make that a little bit where it doesn't have any output on disk, right, it can be easier to replace or do whatever we want to do with it. I think that the idea that we're not, if we skip a phase, we're actually replacing the phase. We are re-implementing the phase is the way to put it, maybe. Like, you don't skip a phase because you don't want to do it. You skip a phase because you want to do it your way. You want to do it in .NET, or you want to do it in not so secret, non-existent, super secret Google crypto. But yes.
Technically, there is one thing I do want to skip altogether, and that's marking the master, because our master node isn't registered with the API server.
That's a philosophical question about, like, do you mark if a master doesn't exist?
Yeah.
But good. I don't know what the next steps should be in terms of concrete. I'd like to see some more. I feel like we don't have a lot of blockers on this list, and I feel like we could knock off the blockers and we would not yet necessarily see immediate adoption by everyone. So I certainly will be trying to dig more and add some more COPS ones. I don't know if anyone else can add at least their +1s or a list of blockers if they're not yet on here. That would be helpful if people could think about that. Otherwise, I guess we start on it, report it back, and figure out which ones are the most important to do and how we want to attack them.
Yeah. To be fair, I think most of GKE's integration work is on GKE side. So that's why there are not a lot of blockers there on the kubeadm list.
Yeah. And
would you run kubeadm on the master or not, Chris, in GKE, or is it just going to be node side?
Node side probably first, but we are aiming to reuse as much of kubeadm on the master as possible.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, that's indeed the more complex part. And just a like plug for contributing to kubeadm. I mean, all these suggestions sound fine to me, but still, someone's got to do them. So if you're wanting to like actually dig into something, like ping me on Slack or whatever, and I can guide you to some first maybe like starter things, and then maybe some more heavy ones. Because I mean, there's indeed a lot to do here still.
I'm certainly thinking about like alternatives to init and join, for example, which seems like a tricky one. Go for it.
I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, if you specify external etcd cluster, yes, and we have a special mode like sync mode or something, then we can just lock on etcd, and the first one just in Go code runs the master like function, and the other just runs the other function. What?
We're trying to build it up as some big task that I'm taking on to encourage everyone else to take on other tasks. So it's impossible. It's not.
Okay. Okay.
But anyway, I think we're more or less at time. If anyone else has anything they want to throw in there, Robert, I saw you maybe waving. No.
No, I was glad Lucas linked that doc, so I wanted to take another look at it.
Cool. Well, if that's it, then everyone have a great rest of their Tuesdays. I think do we want to go every 2 weeks from now on? Is that right? Does that work for people? As we talked about last time. I know there's still some people that are unhappy with the time slot. I encourage everyone that is unhappy with the time slot and is watching this on YouTube, presumably, to go and like add on to the spreadsheet which we put around the other day and is still linked from the SIG Cluster Lifecycle minutes to add your times, and hopefully we can see if there's another time that works. But frankly, this time slot is a runaway winner. Chris?
Not to introduce more complexity, but I did have an idea for a way to solve the scheduling conflict. We do have another working group for the cluster API, and possibly switching times around between the two working groups would allow for different people to join either one accordingly. We can talk about that later, just throwing it out there.
Do you have a time slot for that? When is the time slot?
I was going to send an email out, and we were going to do the spreadsheet vote thing, so we could probably just address it at that time.
It'd be every other
That sounds great.
Yeah, sounds cool. And I think we're out of time now. So happy Tuesday, everyone, and see you in 2 weeks.
Have a good one.
On this call. Bye.